As far as the brain from going 0 to 25, 25 plus, can you explain how that works as far as neuroplasticity, and then after 25, how it works for people as well?
Yeah. So some of your audience may already know this, but neuroplasticity is this incredible feature of the brain's ability to change in response to experience. And we should probably broaden that definition to say the nervous system, because the brain is obviously amazing, but that's just the part of the nervous system that's housed in the skull. You've also got all these connections with the organs of the body that control breathing and heart rate. Those can change too. Right. When you hear about things like muscle memory, actually muscle has no memory. It's the nerve connections that change when you learn something and you relearn it. So neuroplasticity.
Would that be connected with fascia at all?
Yeah, so fascia can, they receive fascia, which is stuff wrapping the muscles really tight. They receive some neural innervation. Okay. The fascia kind of talks to the nerves, not so much the other way around. Okay. But I'm sure now that I said that, someone out there is going to, correct me. But and they're probably right. Most things in the body are bidirectional. So like the heart is communicating to the brain how fast it's beating. The brain is also controlling heart rate. The lungs are communicating with the brain are communicating with the lungs. So the reason I am hesitant to say it's all one direction is that typically when one looks a little bit more closely, you see that it's a two-way conversation. Okay. So anytime we talk about neuroplasticity, we're talking about the nervous system changing in some way to make the nervous system function better or worse. So a head injury will give you neuroplasticity, but it's called maladaptive plasticity. It doesn't make you better. So typically when we talk about plasticity, we're talking about adaptive plasticity, some change in the nervous system that allows you to be better, think better, perform better, any of that. That means something changed. And you asked about the 0 to 25 versus 25 and older. It's a pretty well accepted principle of neuroscience that the nervous system changes very easily from the time we're born until about age 25. It's not like on your 25th birthday, you get the gift of no more plasticity. It tapers off. And for some people it'll be 27 and some people will be 24. But from birth until 25, the entire nervous system, because of the chemicals that are circulating, because of a number of things, it just wants to change. And so it changes through just passive experience. So a child goes to their first movie or watches their first movie, and it changes the way they view the world forever. And you can unlearn things. That's also neuroplasticity. But all you need to do as a young person is be exposed to something and it will change your brain, provided it's novel or it's interesting enough or it makes you alert enough, you'll change. Now, after age 25, you can still get neuroplasticity, but the mechanisms completely change. The chemicals that are involved completely change. The ways to get neuroplasticity shift, and there are a couple requirements. The first one is that it has to be self-directed. We love the idea that we tell people to change and they're going to change, but the only change that comes after age 25 is self-directed change. You can shape a child for better or for worse. You can literally shape their brain and their nervous system. I mean, I would just watch the Tiger Woods documentary. He was shaped as a child to become the best golfer, and he obviously contributed to that. But you can't take an adult and make them the best golfer in the world unless they want to be the best golfer in the world. So there's a little bit of a contractual thing with the nervous system.
Is there a reason why that happens? Like, so is it just because children are more malleable? Is it because what's the actual reason for that?
Yeah, great question. So when you're born until about age 25, the connections between neurons, we call those synapses. And it's a little bit of a tricky name because we talk about as connections, but they're actually spaces between the neurons. They're like these little gaps, and the neurons spit chemicals back and forth across those gaps. Those synapses are the communication points between neurons. And anytime you learn something or unlearn something, anytime you acquire new language or motor skill, the arrangement of those connections changes. It's like new roads through a city kind of thing. So when you turn roughly 25, there's a significant change in the amount of space between neurons, and they literally don't have as much space to move around. It's called extracellular space, and it's not like cement gets poured in there. But there are a bunch of things. For the aficionados, these are like glycoproteins, and they have all these fancy names, perineuronal nets and that kind of thing. If people want to learn more, they can look that up. But you fill in that space, and it literally makes it harder to move things around. So the brain early on it has some things that can't change, like the areas that control heart rate or breathing. You don't want those to change because you want your heart rate functioning in the background all the time. But it's a little bit more like a a Lego set. You can move things around a particular foundation. Now, after age 25, it's more like you've got the model glued together and you can, steam away some glue and move things around, but it takes work.
Right.
And the work consists of focus. It requires intense focus. So a child, you can just put them in front of an experience or put them in an experience and it'll shape their brain. But as an older person, meaning 25 or older, you have to really concentrate on what it is exactly you're trying to change.
Yeah.
And this again is referring to adaptive plasticity, because again, a head injury will change your brain, but for the worse. So today, if I'm talking about plasticity from here on, unless we say otherwise, we're talking about adaptive plasticity. Okay. So there's less space for things to move around. You need focus. And there's also this interesting thing that you need focus, and then you also need deep rest afterwards, because that's actually when the changes occur, the resculpting of the brain. And the focus is key, because the focus on what you're trying to learn causes the release of particular chemicals. We can talk about those if you like. Yeah. And those chemicals send a signal to the brain, something needs to change. And if you think about it, there's no reason for your nervous system to change at all. Why should it? And these chemicals that make us feel alert or surprised or anxious or afraid or very, very excited, those aren't just for our emotional experience. Yeah. Those mark time in the brain and say, wait, something's different now than it was a few minutes before this happened. Right. And now there's this opportunity to learn. And then the brain starts looking around for, well, what should I learn? Right. And we could talk about what the steps are for changing, but it's really a chemical and an actual physical difference in the brain between 0 to 25 and after 25 that underlies this shift in what we call passive plasticity early in life. You just passively go through life, and for better or for worse, by 25, your brain is going to be the way it is. And then you can still change it, but you have to dig in and put some effort.
Right, which is important, because most people think, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I just am the way that I am. And so I guess it makes sense in the sense that, if 100,000 years ago, you and I are walking by and you decide you want to go get water from a lake and alligator takes you, that's going to be a very heightened state. There's going to be a lot of focus that's going to come to that. It's going to tell me next time I go near something like this, I need to be more careful. So it seems like it can be an evolutionary trait to make sure that people, for safety, I guess, long-term. But is the chemical that you're talking about acetylcholine that's released from the brain when immediately we need to focus on something?
Yeah, so acetylcholine is one chemical in the cocktail of chemicals that allow the brain to change as an adult. The example you gave of the alligator or the crocodile grabbing your hiking partner and pulling them away, it's a really good one. Actually, if that happened, a couple of things would be clear. If something really bad happens, you get what's called one trial learning. You will never forget that happened. And for some people, they think, oh my goodness, I've had these traumas. How will I ever forget? You can unlearn the emotional relationship to it, but you will never forget. It's kind of remarkable. Yeah. It's kind of the stinger of biology, because you wish that you could have that for other things that were more pleasant. But not only would you not forget the alligator event, but you would remember all the things that led up to it, even though you weren't thinking about those as it happened. So that morning, you putting on your shoes in a particular way, the trajectory you took to get to that lake, all that suddenly would be called up to memory and packaged into this experience. And so this is, it gets to a lot of things related to trauma, where people will or PTSD, people will start to have all the physical symptoms of a trauma that have nothing to do with the actual traumatic experience. Yeah. And we always hear the kind of cliche example of, a car backfires and then the veteran who's come back thinks that they're in a battle. It's actually, that can happen, but more typically it's they get up in the morning, they're making up a cup of coffee, and bam, all of a sudden the emotions hit, the physical symptoms hit. And it probably relates to the fact that things that happened, actual traumas that happen, capture elements in time before, during, and afterward. Oh, wow. And so the nervous system wants safety. Fundamentally, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs starts in the nervous system. Everything's anchored first in the nervous system. And so you would capture that entire sequence of events. Now, for positive things, the negative events are triggered, the highlighting of negative events, I should say, is triggered by the release of epinephrine, which is adrenaline. So adrenaline comes from the kidneys in our body. That makes us breathe faster, makes us pupils dilate, all the physical symptoms of stress and anxiety. In the brain, we call that exact same molecule epinephrine, just to confuse people. Yeah. I didn't name them, so You know,
and then there's norepinephrine. That's something that's not the same
norepinephrine,
thing.
which is similar but not quite the same. But we'll call it epinephrine or adrenaline interchangeably. So that causes alertness, and it has no bias towards positive events or negative events. So if you see somebody that you really enjoy seeing and you didn't expect to see them, epinephrine will be released into your body. As well, acetylcholine, which was the neuromodulator that you mentioned, is released. And acetylcholine acts like a spotlight. So as I mentioned, when we're excited by something and we're stressed, our pupils dilate, which actually causes us to go into a bit of a tunnel vision. We don't always experience it as dark around the edges kind of tunnel, but we don't see the big picture, literally. It changes the optics of our eyes. We get much better at seeing individual things. If you've ever been in love, you've experienced this because the person just seems to occupy your entire visual field and your entire emotional field, as it were. So there's this kind of soda straw view of the world. Not always bad. It can be good, as in falling in love or being excited about something. And acetylcholine is a molecule that's released in the brain that is marking or highlighting the specific areas of the brain that are active during a particular event. So one way to think about this is if you decided that it were important to you to, say, learn a particular language or to learn all there is to know about something that's very vital to your life for some reason, the information would literally be highlighted as you read it in your brain, and that would make it easier to learn. So, but the actual learning doesn't take place while you have that acetylcholine swimming around in your brain and highlighting things, or the epinephrine, the adrenaline. It happens later when you go to sleep. The reorganization of the brain happens in deep rest, sleep and things like it. And so this is why sometimes people will work very, very hard at trying to make a change, and it's just not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. And then they'll take a little bit of a break, or a week later they come back and they nail it.
Yeah.
That is because the changes don't actually occur during the attempt to learn.
Yeah.
And maybe one other thing that I don't think I've ever really talked about terribly much on podcasts is that errors and making mistakes is key. And that's not just as thematically like, oh, errors are good. You learn from errors. You know, what is the Michael Jordan thing? I missed whatever 10,000 of the shots I didn't take. I can never remember the quote. Anyway, making errors is good, but at a neurobiological level, plasticity is faster when you make errors. And here's why. When you do everything properly, you get up from your chair, you go get a glass of water, you speak the languages you speak, why should your brain change?
Right.
It has the complete operating manual for what you need to do.
Right.
When you make a mistake, it feels terrible because you release epinephrine, and most people will tilt away from the experience at that point. They want to walk away. But if you can focus on what just happened and what you're trying to do, you bring acetylcholine to the learning experience. And when you make errors, there's something called top-down processing. It means that the higher order areas of your brain send signals deep into the brain. Whatever you're about to do next is really important. And so it's probably best thought of as throwing darts at a dartboard, because it's just so straightforward to use as an example. So if I throw a dart, misses the dartboard entirely. I've been that guy, by the way, at the bar in college, like really bad. I've not great binocular vision, which is ironic because I study vision. But so if I close one eye, I'm actually better. And I throw it, okay, so then I'm off from the bullseye, and I'm getting frustrated. It's like, and I want to walk away from it. But if I keep doing that, what's happening is my brain is queuing up all sorts of things without me realizing it, like what trajectory my arm is taking when it goes left, what trajectory my arm is taking when it goes right, why suddenly I think I'm doing everything right and it hits the wall again. And if I were to go away from that for a short while, or maybe continue to just throw errors, I'm learning faster than if I get closer on the first try.
Right.
So the brain takes error signals and says, okay, we need to correct this, and that's plasticity. So to make it really concrete, making errors isn't just good because we tell people it's good and you have to try, you have to fail in order to learn.
Right.
It's actually the best portal into learning.
Yeah.
Your brain will not change, your nervous system will not change unless you're making errors. And this is actually what kids do really well. The kid learning to walk is falling down all the time. And the brain is updating, okay, what was different? And a lot of it's subconscious. The kid isn't thinking, I have to bend my left knee a little bit more. I need to, flex a stabilizer muscle in my tibialis. They don't think like that. The nervous system is very smart and it just figures it out. So focus, errors, and rest. Focus, errors, rest. Focus, errors, rest. And then pretty soon you have fluency